Adolf Hitler, born on April 20, 1889, became the Chancellor of Germany in 1933 after the Nazi Party's electoral victories. He ruled the nation absolutely until his suicide in April 1945. Once in power, Hitler dismantled Germany's democratic institutions and turned it into a war state with the aim of conquering Europe for the benefit of the so-called Aryan race. His invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, marked the start of the European phase of World War II, during which Nazi military forces executed 11 million people deemed inferior or undesirable. Hitler had the active support of the powerful German officer class and millions of ordinary citizens who believed in the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazi, and saw him as a national savior, as evidenced by the massive stadium rallies. The question of how Hitler and the Nazis rose to power in a country that was a world leader in literature, art, architecture, and science, with a democratic government and a free press in the 1920s, remains puzzling. Hitler emerged as a leader after World War I, founding the Nazi Party with other German patriots. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which compelled Germany to accept responsibility for the war and pay exorbitant reparations, left the country humiliated and outraged. The Allies took away Germany's prized overseas colonies, gave French and Polish territories, radically downsized the army, and barred the country from having submarines or an air force, leading to immense frustration and anger among Germans. The payment of crushing war reparations destabilized the German economy, leading to ruinous hyperinflation. By September 1923, it took 4 billion German marks to equal the value of $1 American, and consumers had to carry wheelbarrows of paper money to buy even a loaf of bread. Hitler, a captivating orator, spoke at political rallies in Munich, advocating for a new German order to replace what he viewed as an ineffective and inefficient democratic regime. This new order would be characterized by an authoritarian political system with a leadership structure where authority flowed from a supreme national leader downwards. In this new Germany, all citizens would selflessly serve the state or Volk. Democracy would be eliminated, and individual rights sacrificed for the sake of the Führer state. The Nazi Party's ultimate goal was to gain power through Germany's parliamentary system, establish Hitler as a dictator, and build a community of racially pure Germans loyal to their Führer, who would lead them in a campaign of racial purification and world domination. Hitler blamed the Weimar Republic's weakness on Germany's Jewish and communist minorities, whom he accused of trying to take over the country. There are only two possibilities, he told a Munich audience in 1922. Either victory for the Aryan or annihilation of the Aryan and the triumph of the Jew. In his youth, Hitler saw history as a racial struggle, with the strongest race, the Aryan race, prevailing through armed force. Mankind has grown great in eternal war, he wrote. It would decay in eternal peace. Jews symbolized everything the Nazis despised, including finance capitalism, which they believed was controlled by powerful Jewish financiers, international communism, with Karl Marx being a German Jew and the leadership of the German Communist Party heavily Jewish, and modernist cultural movements like psychoanalysis and swing music. The foreign policy of the Nazi Party aimed to achieve several goals, including the expulsion of Jews and other so-called inferior races from Europe. They sought to incorporate pure-blooded Aryans into a greatly expanded Germany, which would become the Third Reich. Additionally, the Nazis planned to wage unrelenting war on the Slavic hordes of Russia, who Hitler considered to be subhuman. After conquering the Soviet Union, the German master race would rule over a racially cleansed Russia, where millions of Slavs would either be exterminated or subjugated to make way for Lebensraum, or living space. Germans would work on model farms and factories in the newly acquired territories, which would be connected to the homeland by new autobahns. Hitler, the chief ideologue and organizer of the Nazi Party, established the party's official newspaper, flag, and private army, the Sturmabteilung SA, stormtroopers, made up mainly of unemployed and disillusioned World War I veterans. By 1923, the SA had grown to 15,000 men with access to hidden weapon stores. In that year, Hitler and World War I hero General Erich Ludendorff attempted to overthrow the elected regional government of Bavaria in a coup called the Beerhall Putsch, which the regular army quickly crushed. Hitler spent a year in prison, during which he dictated most of the first volume of his political autobiography, Mein Kampf. After his release from prison, Hitler initially vowed to work within the parliamentary system. However, the worldwide economic depression and the rising power of labor unions and communists convinced increasing numbers of Germans to turn to the Nazi Party. The Nazis capitalized on bank failures and unemployment to portray democratic government as ineffective. Hitler promised to restore prosperity, create civil order, eliminate the influence of Jewish financiers, and make Germany a world power once again. By 1932, the Nazis had become the largest political party in the Reichstag, and in January of the following year, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. A fire broke out in the Reichstag building in Berlin shortly thereafter, and a young Dutch communist confessed to starting it. Hitler used this event to convince Hindenburg to declare an emergency decree suspending civil liberties throughout Germany, including freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and the right to hold public assemblies. The police were authorized to detain citizens without cause, and Hitler's national regime gained control over the authority usually exercised by regional governments. After coming to power, Hitler wasted no time in dismantling Germany's democratic institutions and imprisoning or killing his main opponents. When President Hindenburg passed away in 1934, Hitler seized the titles of Führer, Chancellor, and Commander-in-Chief of the Army. He rapidly expanded the army, reintroduced conscription, and developed a new air force, all of which violated the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's extravagant military spending and ambitious public works programs, such as constructing a German Autobahn, helped revive the economy. His regime also suppressed the Communist Party and purged his own paramilitary stormtroopers, whose violent street demonstrations had alienated the German middle class. This purge, known as the Night of the Long Knives, was widely supported and viewed by the middle class as a strike for law and order. Many Germans believed that Hitler's policies would ultimately benefit the country. In 1938, Hitler began his long-awaited expansion of national boundaries by incorporating ethnic Germans. He colluded with Austrian Nazis to orchestrate the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria into Germany. In his most daring act of aggression yet, Hitler forced Czechoslovakia to surrender the Sudetenland, a mountainous border region primarily populated by ethnic Germans. Hitler wasted no time in dismantling Germany's democratic institutions and imprisoning or killing his chief opponents. After the death of President Hindenburg in 1934, Hitler assumed the titles of Führer, Chancellor, and Commander-in-Chief of the Army. He expanded the army, reintroduced conscription, and developed a new air force in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's military spending and ambitious public works programs, such as building the Autobahn, helped restore prosperity. His regime suppressed the Communist Party and purged the stormtroopers, whose violent demonstrations had alienated the middle class. This purge, known as the Night of the Long Knives, was widely welcomed by the German middle class as a blow for law and order. Many Germans supported Hitler's policies, convinced that they would ultimately benefit the country. In 1938, Hitler began his long-promised expansion of national boundaries to incorporate ethnic Germans. He colluded with Austrian Nazis to orchestrate the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, and forced Czechoslovakia to surrender the Sudetenland, a mountainous border region populated mainly by ethnic Germans. The Czechs looked to Great Britain and France for help, but these nations, hoping to avoid war, chose a policy of appeasement. At the Munich Conference in September 1938, representatives of Great Britain and France compelled Czech leaders to cede the Sudetenland in return for Hitler's pledge not to seek additional territory. The following year, Germany swallowed up the remainder of Czechoslovakia, and Hitler's troops stormed into Poland, leading to the outbreak of World War II.